Okay, physical abuse. And this is a very complex looking chart. And this is the one that tripped people up in their reporting a lot. There are criteria, and I will say to you that maybe, you know, as the legislation was crafted and people's opinions sought, and in the end there had to be a decision made about kind of the limit and the scope. So the definition that sits in the legislation of physical abuse is the way that it shows in this tree. So here we are, the usual: immediately investigate, take action, of course, that whole path to be followed. Parallel path: are there reasonable grounds physical abuse has occurred or may occur? To determine, so we're going to go down. Now we're not yet at the whodunit column. We're at there are actually two chunks that are considered physical abuse. So one of the chunks is about physical force. Was there physical force applied to a resident? And that's what comes most obviously to mind when we say the word physical abuse. But the other chunk of the definition is about medications. Was a drug administered or withheld for an inappropriate purpose? So that nurse that example I gave you about the medication nurse, I'm not giving 4 o'clock meds because I was rushed. I had a fight with my teenager before I came, and I'm upset. I'm going out for a smoke. And so to heck with the 4 o'clock meds. What withheld for an inappropriate purpose? You bet. Okay. Or administered. In fact, Tammy Rankin talks about a situation that did go to the criminal system of a staff member who an evening staff member who poured all of the medications that people were to get from 3 o'clock to 11 o'clock at night and gave them all at once. And so obviously administered for an inappropriate purpose so she would have a quiet evening. So they also were interesting because they said, licensees to licensee audience, keep your eyes out, a little trigger for you, like the financial abuse thing, a little trigger on this medication thing. Do you have shifts where it always happens to be the same staff on that are really quiet shifts? Have a little look at that. May or may not be anything to follow up. Also, have a little look about the use of PRN medication that's not a regular scheduled dose, but that is available for special purposes, like if you have a fever, you know, Tylenol every 4 hours or whatever. Notice, is there a pattern on certain shifts that everybody on that floor is getting their PRNs? You know, whether they've required them for 2 months before or not. Have a little look at that. And that's all part of the quality management program that the licensee is required to be building. And really the best homes already have in place their quality management. So let's break this down then, because you'll see there is a difference depending on which chunk of the physical abuse definition. Are you still all awake? Good. Okay. So let's go down the physical force path. Was physical force applied to a resident? Yes, let's say yes it was. Was it applied, and this is the whodunit column, was it applied by a resident? So we're talking about a resident to resident altercation. Let's say in this case the answer is yes, it was one resident to another. Here is a key question, and this is a question that often people jumped ahead and reported when really they needed to deal with it within the home, but it wasn't reportable to the ministry. Did it cause physical injury to another resident? So if that resident-to-resident altercation resulted in injury to another resident, then it was immediately report. Notice, and this is why I emphasize with the emotional and verbal, those are the only two that talk about the cognitive ability of the person doing the act. It does not matter if the person, the resident doing it, is cognitively aware or cognitively or not, if they meant it or they didn't mean it. If it caused physical injury to that other resident, then it's reportable as physical abuse to us. Now, the way the home manages it may be different based on the needs of the residents involved. But the fact of it is that resident to resident, where there is injury, it is immediately reportable. However, this is where we got into some confusion of underreporting for one thing, because let's go back to the whodunit column. Was it applied by a resident? No, it was not. It was somebody other than a resident. So we go down this column, makes it different because the expectation is higher. Did the physical force cause physical injury? Well, that's the same if it was resident to resident, or pain. Lots of homes were not paying any attention to the fact that it said pain. So, well, because we think, or we found out that maybe this staff member was a little rough, but the resident didn't have any pain or any injury or anything, so okay. Not so. If it caused pain. Now, sometimes there are people, and there are all different ways of assessing pain. Sometimes the person who was the victim can't say to you, I have pain, or ow, or after the fact they forgot that they had pain. So the licensee needs to be recognizing if it's something that ought to have caused pain. Okay? So we had an interesting situation, because now after these decision trees, it's actually been we've had really good response from the sector, and people now kind of call and say, can you just walk through this with me on the decision tree? And we don't give them the answer, but we help them walk through and say, well, and a home had a bit of a discussion with an inspector saying we didn't need to, who went in and found out that there was an incident that they had not reported. They said, well, it didn't cause physical injury. Well, did it cause pain? Well, no, the person never said it caused pain. Well, look at, somebody saw, and somebody saw somebody slap a non-resident, slap a resident. That ought to and probably did cause pain in the moment. So the home is not off the hook for reporting that. That would be, or they need to keep going down the pathway to see about reporting. So the pain aspect is big, and sometimes that's also where it's really hard, to be fair to the inspectors, to inspect. Because after the fact, you don't know if the person can't tell you, but that needs to be reported, at least. It needs to come onto the radar. So let's say, yes, it caused physical injury or pain. It was done by somebody not a resident. So, but notice it doesn't lead you, well, then you report it immediately. There is this section in the definition, understanding people come to long-term care because they require extra assistance with things, and often that's physical assistance, and often it's something that requires I'll use kind of an evangelical term, that laying on of hands, an actual connection of hands. And sometimes it even involves a certain degree of force, like turning somebody, or helping somebody up from the toilet, that kind of thing. So there are times when it's totally appropriate, lots of times, for staff to have hands on residents. Now, the question, though, about that is, was that use of force appropriate to provision of care or assisting a resident with ADLs? So if it is something that, yes, would require that connection of the staff physically having hands on the resident, so the answer might be yes, but that's not the end of the questioning. Then the question is, was the force excessive in the circumstances? So if I'm helping somebody up from the chair and I go, yank, that is excessive force for that action. If I'm pulling someone's clothing up and I just yank it right up, that is excessive force. Oh, sorry, good, thank you. I'm sorry, we get so into the jargon. Activity of daily living, so that would be help with toileting, transferring, eating, dressing, all of those a lot of them physical based, well, they are all physically based activities that people might need actual hands on.